Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth remains under fire over these reports of a possible war crime tonight. Video of that infamous second strike, which killed the survivors, is still being hidden by the administration. NBC reports Admiral Frank Bradley, who oversaw the attack, has told lawmakers that they concluded the boat was not actually heading to the United States at all, that it was going towards a South American country, and the alleged drugs on the boat were actually intended for a different continent, possibly Europe or Africa, but not the U.S. NBC has two U.S. officials and one person familiar with the briefings on that point, which of course explodes the entire rationale for the U.S. doing anything to that boat. Would expect at a minimum a review of the intelligence, and then also questions about whether the United States was in the right legal or moral position to kill all those people if it had nothing to do with our country. Bradley said Hegseth ordered the military to kill all 11 people. There was an internal list of that the U.S. has of what they believe are narco-terrorists, and thus they could be lethally targeted. That echoes the drone war era, where decisions made in Washington on paper quickly become a rationale for killing without any trial or process. Quote, while the survivors were not armed, Bradley said the mission identified the drugs as the threat to the U.S. Just imagine how expansive a kill authorization could be if you accept that. This is why we have laws of war. And again, we're not yet at war with this country. But if you can say that drugs, which of course are perhaps sadly trafficked all over the world, are the rationale as the threat, and it doesn't matter whether they're coming to the U.S., and the people on board don't have to be attacking the U.S., but that threat allows you to kill a bunch of people without declaring war or having a trial or doing intelligence, well, that's a license to kill everywhere.
You know what really gets me fired up? When the people we're supposed to trust start hiding things. When the supposed guardians of transparency suddenly develop selective amnesia about what they can and cannot show the American public. And right now, we're watching that play out in real time with one of the most explosive military controversies this administration has faced. I'm talking about Pete Hegseth, the Pentagon chief who's currently drowning in scrutiny over what might be an actual war crime committed on his watch. And the craziest part, they're still hiding the video that could prove everything one way or the other. Let me paint you a picture of what we're dealing with here. Back in September, the U.S. military conducted a strike on a boat in the Caribbean. The official story, drug smugglers, narco-terrorists, bad guys bringing poison to American shores. Classic stuff, right? Except here's where things get absolutely insane. After that first missile hit, surveillance footage shows two men survived, two human beings treading water, clinging to wreckage in the middle of the ocean. And then the military launched a second strike, killed them both, blew them to smithereens while they were helpless in the water. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Now, I want you to really think about what that means. These weren't people shooting at our forces. They weren't armed combatants charging toward American troops. They were survivors of a shipwreck, holding on to floating debris, probably terrified out of their minds, and someone made the decision to finish them off. That's the allegation that's tearing through Washington right now like a Category 5 hurricane, and Hegseth is standing right in the eye of the storm. NBC News broke some absolutely damning details that should make every American sit up and pay attention. Admiral Frank Bradley, the guy who actually oversaw this operation, sat down with lawmakers behind closed doors and told them something that completely demolishes the administration's entire justification for this strike. Remember how they said these drugs were heading to the United States? How this was all about protecting American families from deadly narcotics flooding our streets? Yeah, complete garbage. According to Bradley's own testimony to Congress, U.S. intelligence concluded the boat wasn't heading to America at all, not even close. It was traveling south toward another South American country. The drugs on board, they were destined for a different continent entirely. Europe, maybe Africa, but definitely not the U.S. Let that sink in for a second. The entire rationale, the whole foundation for why American military forces had any business blowing these people out of the water just evaporated. NBC has confirmation from 2 U.S. officials and another person who sat in on those classified briefings. This isn't speculation or partisan spin. This is what the admiral in charge of the operation told our elected representatives when he was under oath and speaking to Congress. But wait, it gets even more twisted. Bradley told lawmakers that Hegseth ordered the military to kill all 11 people on that boat. All of them. Why? Because they were on some internal U.S. list of narco-terrorists who could be, quote-unquote, lethally targeted. Now, if that phrase sounds familiar to you, it should. This is the same exact framework we used during the drone war era, when decisions made by politicians in Washington became instant death sentences for people halfway around the world. No trial, no due process, just names on a list and missiles in the sky. And here's where the legal gymnastics get truly Olympic-level absurd. Bradley said that while the survivors weren't armed, the mission identified the drugs themselves as the threat to the United States. Read that again. The drugs were the threat, not the people. The contraband floating in the ocean was apparently such an existential danger to America that 2 unarmed men treading water had to die. Think about how expansive that authorization becomes if we accept that logic. If you can justify killing people because drugs exist nearby, and it doesn't matter if those drugs are actually coming to the U.S. and the people don't have to be attacking anyone, then you've basically created a license to kill anywhere on the planet. This is exactly why we have laws of war. This is precisely why the international community spent decades developing rules about how military force can be used. The Atlantic has been reporting on this second video, the footage that lawmakers and a handful of service members have been allowed to see behind closed doors. And according to their sources, watching it was traumatic. The article describes footage of 2 men's desperate final moments, scenes that made some viewers physically ill. One person nearly vomited. Try to imagine what you'd have to witness to have that kind of reaction. These are people who work in national security, who've probably seen their share of combat footage and intelligence materials, and this video shook them to their core. Because think about what we're probably looking at here. A person who might be a protected survivor under international maritime law, pleading for help in the middle of the ocean, holding on to wreckage, maybe waving at aircraft overhead, and then watching as a missile streaks down and ends their life in an explosion. We haven't seen this footage. The American people haven't seen it. But the lawmakers who have are describing it as deeply disturbing, and that should tell you everything you need to know about what's really on that video. Hegseth, for his part, continues to defend the strike using all the greatest hits of counterterrorism language. He keeps talking about threats and eliminating danger and protecting the homeland. But here's what he won't do. He won't release that video. When pressed about it, when asked directly, when the American people can see the footage that supposedly justifies his decisions, he falls back on the most predictable bureaucratic dodge in the playbook. We're reviewing it right now. Translation? We're trying to figure out how to spin this, or we're hoping you'll forget about it if we delay long enough. President Trump said he'd have no problem if the full video gets released. Great. Wonderful. So where is it? When can we see it? The answer apparently is never, or at least not until they've carefully edited and curated what we're allowed to view. And this is part of a pattern we've seen over and over again from this administration. They release the videos that make them look tough and decisive. They parade around the footage that shows missiles hitting targets and boats exploding. But the moment something happens that might make them look bad, that might raise uncomfortable questions about legality or morality, suddenly everything's under review. Suddenly we need time to assess and evaluate and consider. It's all part of one operation, and it's not even subtle. The hiding leads directly to the scrutiny, which leads to accusations of a cover-up, which leads to more pressure to release the video, which leads to more stalling and deflection. Round and round we go. Meanwhile, Republicans who viewed the classified footage are defending the strike, which tells us we've got a partisan divide on what should be a straightforward question of whether American forces committed a war crime. Some of this might be genuine disagreement about what the evidence shows, but let's be real, some of it is almost certainly party loyalty overriding basic moral judgment. And now there's a major push from lawmakers who want to see not just the edited highlight reel, but the complete unedited video. Senator Adam Schiff put it perfectly when he laid out the core issue during a recent appearance. He said that intentionally killing two people who are shipwrecked at sea is morally repugnant. And then he asked the question that cuts right to the heart of this whole mess. If the Pentagon and the Defense Secretary are so proud of what they're doing, if this was such a righteous and justified action, then why not let people see it? Why not show us two people sitting on a capsized boat? Let us watch them get deliberately killed, and then we can all decide for ourselves whether we're proud of what our country is doing. That's a completely fair request, and it should be a no-brainer standard for transparency. But here's why they're terrified to do it. Because once the American people actually see what happened, once we watch helpless survivors get executed in the water, the narrative collapses. You can't dress that up with tough talk about narco-terrorists. You can't spin that with rhetoric about protecting the homeland. It is what it is, and what it is looks an awful lot like murder. This issue has broken through in a way that most Washington controversies don't. We're not talking about some obscure policy dispute that only political junkies care about. This story has penetrated into the national consciousness because it touches on fundamental questions that haven't changed just because we have new technology or a new political era. Americans have deep connections to the military. We've got millions of military households in this country, people who've served, people whose parents or grandparents or children have worn the uniform. And there's both tremendous pride in what our military represents and serious concern about what happens when politicians abuse that institution. When Americans start to believe that the people in charge are changing the rules, putting our service members in compromising positions, demanding they do things that violate the uniform code of military justice, executing shipwreck survivors as multiple accounts now report, people get rightfully upset. This isn't some abstract debate about foreign policy doctrine. This is about whether we're going to be the kind of country that hunts down defenseless people in the water and kills them. And I don't care how tough you think that sounds. I don't care how much you want to project strength. That's not strength. That's barbarism dressed up in military jargon. The fact that this story has become such a massive deal tells you something important. Saturday Night Live, which usually sticks to safe political humor, went after the defense secretary directly. They had a sketch mocking Hegseth, where the punchline was about dead fishermen and narco-terrorists, joking about whether 80 or 67 people died. When you're getting roasted on SNL for potential war crimes, when that's the level of public awareness this story has achieved, you know it's not going away. The administration can stonewall all they want, but the American people aren't stupid. We can see what's happening here. We brought in retired four-star General Wesley Clark to get his perspective on this mess, and his response was measured but clear. He said we need to see all the evidence before making final judgments. That video is obviously crucial, but so are the orders that were given to Admiral Bradley by Secretary Hegseth. There should be an operations plan. There should be written orders. There should be rules of engagement spelled out, even though Hegseth has publicly said he doesn't respect those rules legally. That last part should terrify you, by the way. The defense secretary saying he doesn't have to follow the rules of engagement, that's not tough leadership. That's a recipe for exactly the kind of disaster we're dealing with now. General Clark pointed out that making proper judgments is difficult until we've seen all the documentation. Right now, the reaction to this briefing is splitting along partisan lines, which is unfortunate but not surprising. You've got the chain of command. You've got to respect the authority of civilian leadership over the military, but all of that has to happen within the bounds of law. And that's the question nobody in the administration seems willing to answer clearly. Was this within the bounds of law, or did we just commit a war crime? The timeline of how this story evolved is revealing all by itself. Initially, the Pentagon announced a precision strike against a drug vessel operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization. Trump posted video of the attack, claimed it killed 11 members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuela-based cartel. Clean story, right? Bad guys eliminated, drugs intercepted, America safer. Except then the Washington Post reported that the initial strike lit the boat on fire, but left 2 survivors clinging to wreckage, and Hegseth personally ordered a second strike to kill everyone aboard. Hegseth denied it, called the reporting fabricated, inflammatory, derogatory, Classic attacking the messenger playbook. But then something interesting happened. Trump, when asked about it, initially backed Hegseth, but then started hedging. Said he had great confidence in Pete, but also said if there were two people around, Pete said that didn't happen. Notice how he's creating distance there, setting up plausible deniability in case this whole thing blows up. And it wasn't long before the White House confirmed, yes, actually there was a second strike. Yes, it did kill survivors. But it was Admiral Bradley who ordered it, not Hegseth. Suddenly, we're playing a game of hot potato with responsibility. Hegseth's story has shifted multiple times as new information comes out. First, he said he watched the strike live. Then, when news of the second strike emerged, he revealed he'd left the room after the initial launch and didn't see the follow-up attack. It was the fog of war, he said. The boat was on fire, covered in smoke, impossible to see survivors, moving the goalposts in real time as the walls close in. Meanwhile, the strikes have continued. This wasn't a one-time incident. Since September, the U.S. military has carried out more than 20 additional strikes on boats they've designated as being manned by narco-terrorists. The death toll is now at least 87 people. 87 human beings killed in what a broad range of legal experts are arguing is an unlawful campaign. Hegseth keeps announcing these strikes on social media like they're achievements to brag about. October 28th, 14 people killed from 3 strikes against 4 boats. October 29th, 4 more dead. November 1st, 3 killed. November 4th, 2 dead. November 6th, 3 more. On and on it goes, this drumbeat of death accumulating week after week. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. Some of these strikes had survivors. In October, they hit a submarine carrying drugs and 2 people survived. What happened to them? They were rescued and repatriated to their home countries. So we can show mercy sometimes. We can take people alive. We can follow the basic rules of maritime law when we feel like it. Which raises the obvious question, why didn't that happen on September 2nd? What was different about that particular operation that required executing survivors instead of capturing them? The justification the administration keeps falling back on is that these targets were on a list, an internal military target list of narco-terrorists who could be lethally engaged if the opportunity arose. It's the kill list framework from the war on terror transplanted to the drug war. But even if we accept that these people were legitimate targets before the strike, here's the problem. The laws of war are clear about what happens to combatants who are hors de combat, incapacitated and no longer able to fight. You can't just execute them. If someone is floating in the ocean, unarmed, no longer a threat, you have obligations under international humanitarian law to treat them humanely. That's not some controversial progressive interpretation. That's basic Geneva Convention stuff that America helped write. Sarah Harrison, a former associate general counsel at the Pentagon who now works at the crisis group think tank, laid out the legal problem perfectly. She said they're breaking the law either way you look at it. If these people were civilians, then killing them is obviously illegal. But even if you assume they were combatants, once they're shipwrecked and unable to fight, killing them is also illegal under the law of armed conflict. There's no version of this story where the second strike was lawful unless you completely abandon the international legal framework that's governed military operations for decades. And that framework matters. It matters because we're not officially at war with Venezuela. We haven't declared war on these cartels. We're conducting military operations in international waters against vessels that we claim pose a threat, but without the legal architecture that would normally govern the use of lethal force. Trump's position, articulated in letters to Congress, is that drug cartels are non-state armed groups whose actions constitute an armed attack against the United States. Therefore, we're acting in self-defense. That's a huge stretch legally. Drug trafficking is terrible. It kills Americans. It funds criminal organizations. All true. But calling it an armed attack that justifies military strikes, that opens doors that maybe shouldn't be opened. The United Kingdom apparently agrees with that assessment because CNN reported that Britain is no longer sharing intelligence with the U.S. about suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean. Why? Because they don't want to be complicit in what they believe are illegal American military strikes. Let that sink in. Our closest ally, the country we have maybe the deepest intelligence sharing relationship with on the planet, is cutting us off on this issue because they think we're violating international law. That should be a massive red flag that something's gone seriously wrong with this campaign. Inside the Pentagon itself, there's reportedly significant concern about the legality of these operations. Lawyers in the Office of General Counsel have raised questions. Multiple current and former uniformed lawyers have told CNN the strikes don't appear lawful. The commander of U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Alvin Halsey, offered to resign during a tense meeting with Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs after raising legal concerns. He's leaving his post in December after just 1 year, which tells you how toxic this situation has become internally. So we've got allies cutting off intelligence sharing. We've got Pentagon lawyers raising red flags. We've got a Southern Command chief who was so uncomfortable he tried to quit. We've got legal experts across the political spectrum saying this looks illegal. And the administration's response is to keep doing more of the same while telling us to trust them. It's all perfectly lawful, approved by the best military and civilian lawyers up and down the chain of command. If that's true, show us the legal opinions, show us the orders, show us the video. Transparency is the only path to credibility here, and they're choosing the opposite. The congressional briefings that just happened were supposed to provide clarity. Admiral Bradley was supposed to clear things up. Instead, we got more contradictions and partisan division. Bradley told lawmakers that everyone on the boat was on that target list, that U.S. intelligence had confirmed their identities and validated them as legitimate targets. But he also acknowledged that intelligence showed the boat wasn't heading to the U.S. It was going to Suriname with drugs likely destined for Europe. He said the survivors weren't armed. He said they appeared to be trying to salvage drugs from the wreckage. He said they might have been trying to radio for help, though other accounts say they had no communication devices. This story isn't going away. Too many people have seen that video now. Too many lawmakers from both parties know what's on it. Too many Pentagon officials are concerned about the legal implications. Too many allies have cut off cooperation. There's too much smoke here for there not to be fire. And eventually, either through congressional pressure or leaks or legal proceedings, the truth is going to come out. The only question is whether it happens through proper channels with accountability or whether it dribbles out in bits and pieces while the administration continues denying and deflecting. For now, we're left with the knowledge that on September 2nd, 11 people died in military strikes ordered by American officials. 2 of them survived the first strike, only to be killed by a follow-up attack while they were helpless in the water. The justification for those killings keeps changing. The story keeps shifting. The evidence keeps getting hidden. And the defense secretary keeps saying he'd do it all again while refusing to show us what actually happened. That's where we are. That's what passes for accountability in this administration. And if we let them get away with it, if we accept this level of secrecy and these kinds of contradictions, then we're setting ourselves up for even worse abuses down the road. Because power doesn't restrain itself. It only responds to pressure and oversight and demands for transparency. And right now, we're not applying nearly enough of any of those things. So keep paying attention to this story. Keep demanding answers. Keep asking why we can't see the video if everything was so legitimate. Keep questioning whether drug interdiction justifies executing survivors. Keep pushing back against the normalization of extrajudicial killing as counterterrorism policy. This matters. It matters for those 11 people who died. It matters for the rule of law. It matters for what kind of country we're going to be. And it's not going to resolve itself. It's only going to change if enough people demand better.